Hey, welcome to the second episode of Was It Worth It? The part-pocast, part-review show by SharcTank. This is Cheesy Danish.
And this here's Pirate Tom.
As a recap, this show won't serve as an extremely in-depth review. This is just two friends who both play the same cheap indie game. We go over a few key points about our experience with the game, and then decide individually whether or not we felt it was worth the money.
This time around, we played the game Deadlight, developed by Tequila Works and published by Microsoft Studios. It is a zombie survival horror platformer, which is a fairly unique adaptation of the zombie genre. Deadlight retails on Steam for $15, but Dane and I were lucky enough to pick it up for $3.50 for a Halloween sale that Steam had going.
It's a pretty good deal.
It was a pretty good deal indeed.
Yeah, you mentioned that the game is sort of has a unique genre. Survival horror, platformer, zombies. It actually feels a lot like classic Prince of Persia, but with zombies. It's a side-scrolling platformer that relies heavily on grabbing ledges, jumping over traps or pits. Also, it takes place in Seattle, Washington, which happens to be where we're located. This excited me at first, although I quickly realized that the representation of Seattle is less than accurate. I was hoping the other aspects of the game would make up for that, but I have to say I was pretty let down overall.
I think they just pretty much made it a big city with trees and figured they have trees in Seattle, so it's Seattle, right?
Yeah, and a couple of pictures of the Space Needle in loading screens.
Yeah, I loved how you had to go to the stadium when that type of stadium never existed in Seattle. It's just, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a minor gripe, but I guess we're a little biased in that regard for obvious reasons.
And while we're on the topic of how the game looked, really to me the thing that stood out the most, or the most positive, it was the graphics, how the game looked. I thought it looked pretty dang good. It should have. It was 4 gigabytes.
Yeah.
For a game that was it was only 2.5D. But despite that, I thought the ambience and the atmosphere was very well done, and it felt very much, the world was very alive.
Yeah, I guess that's fair to say. I didn't really have the graphics fresh in my mind for this conversation, but now that you mention it, when I kind of recall the graphics, stylistically, it actually did look pretty good. I think the animations, I found them to be a little bit clunky, I suppose, but you're right, the atmosphere of the game graphically was pretty good. And the fact that it is 2.5D is actually pretty cool. Usually when games are 2.5D, I actually am not as much of a fan as, the classic two-dimensional, especially if it has really high quality sprites. But in this case, the models and everything actually looked really good from the side. And there's a lot of depth, the way zombies come crawling in from the background and that sort of thing. It was pretty cool the way they did that.
Yeah, that was actually kind of silly for me, how zombies would come crawling in from the background and then get stuck in your plane, your two-dimensional plane, and it's like you jump over a box and then the zombies can't get around it, when you can clearly see there's room in the background for them to move around the box.
That's true. I guess I didn't really consider that, the fact that they kind of used the background and foreground as ways to add depth, but then at the same time, that almost works against them because then things would kind of lock themselves into the two-dimensional plane.
Yeah, it really stood out to me as kind of just silly, but I think it, in terms of looks, it added a lot of depth and it looked really cool. I just think it wasn't, in terms of mechanics, it wasn't really done that well.
Yeah, the presentation wasn't amazing, but honestly, and I don't mean to sound so negative about this game, but I would say that about a lot of the game's aspects. There were some good ideas, maybe some not so good presentation. Like the story, for instance. The story, in my opinion, is just not very good. Despite the fact that they actually have a pretty cool system where you locate the main character's missing diary pages, which, as you read them, you learn a lot more about his backstory. The story and the characters just feel empty. Without giving too much away, there's what I assume was meant to be a huge reveal at the very end of the game, but it's foreshadowed so heavily throughout the game that it ended up being really predictable. The themes are pretty dark and kind of cool, but the presentation, like I said before, just wasn't so good.
Yeah, I liked the diary a lot because it gave you a very deep insight into the mind of the character, which you usually don't get out of games. However, I do want to mention some of the implementation of the finding your diary pages was just kind of silly. It's like I'm in the stadium at a hot dog stand and I found a page of my own diary.
Yeah, I think that was one sort of thing that wasn't really intended to be thought about too much. I'm sure even the developers knew, on one hand, it's kind of dumb that the main character found some torn off pages of his diary in this locker in the middle of nowhere in a place where he's like literally never been in his life. But on the other hand, yeah, like how else would they have you find those pages, you know, unless there was some weird like story element like, oh, the diary snatcher, you know, litters pages of people's diaries all about the town of Seattle.
Yeah. I know, that was just, that's me nitpicking.
No, it's worth mentioning because I found it funny as well.
Yeah.
So next I'll bring up the controls. They're kind of janky. For instance, I'd be climbing on a ledge while simultaneously holding right on the thumbstick with the intent of basically once the character is up on top of the ledge, he'd start running right, like immediately. It's just sort of second nature when it comes to platformers to do that sort of thing. However, because I was holding right on the thumbstick, for some reason, it triggered him to just climb right back down on the same ledge. So I'd be pressing X to climb up on the ledge, and then he'd go right back down. I'd press it again, he'd climb up, he'd go right back down, like 2 or 3 times, which killed me oftentimes. Usually like a zombie would grab at my ankles the third time I climb right back down on the same ledge, or it would be in an area where you're meant to get through the area really quickly, otherwise you'll get crushed by debris or something like that. And it was a little frustrating. I'm not sure if that's because of my controller setup, since I know you were playing with mouse and keyboard. I don't think you quite had that experience.
Well, in those areas that you mentioned where you really have to get through in a certain amount of time, the jankiness, as you put it, of the controls really stood out there. I mean, other than that, I had more of a laid-back pace, so it wasn't really noticeable. There were some odd things like you know, when you're on the top of a wall or a fence, you can press left or right to jump to either side of the wall or fence. And oftentimes when I was at the top of that wall or fence, I would be pressing nothing, and the character would just be jumping back and forth from side to side without me doing anything.
It's interesting. I actually did not have that experience, and it could be because I was using a controller. But when I was researching the game a little bit on the Steam forums, I noticed a lot of people said that they also had that same problem that you just described. So
yeah, it felt like the controls weren't really fleshed out. And you know, especially the parts where you're timed.
Yeah, it's just not tight or responsive enough for those parts.
Exactly. It requires really tight controls that the game itself just doesn't have, so you're forced to... There were certain parts that I did probably 25 times in a row just to... it took me that long to...
Almost felt like a roguelike.
Yeah, exactly. It was just frustrating, to say the least.
Right. And I guess somewhat related to the controls, the game itself seems to kind of like limit you in an effort to try and feel more survival horror than action platformer. For instance, you know, you get that fire axe fairly early on, but for some reason it seems to completely wind the main character after about 3 regular swings or 2 overhead swings, despite the fact that you can sprint for a while or hang on to ledges for quite a long time.
And you can wall jump.
Yeah, you can jump off walls like Ezio from Assassin's Creed. Somehow. I mean, even though the main character is supposed to be an ex-park ranger from Canada, he's somehow like a parkour ranger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of funny because he's just like, I'm a simple man. Park ranger, I like to be kept to myself. And I have cat-like reflexes and the acrobatic skills of a ninja.
I guess he does kind of sound like a cheap Batman.
He does.
When he talks.
He sounds exactly like Batman.
Ultra gruff.
Exactly.
But yeah, so I don't know if you experienced that, but I just found it weird that it gave you the fire axe, and it's like, you can kind of kill zombies with the fire axe sometimes, but A, it was pretty hard to do, and B, most of the time there was more than one zombie, and you just could not take them both out at the same time, no matter what. So 99% of the time, it encouraged you to just run.
I had a serious point of contention here with that fire axe, because the game said, hold the mouse when the enemy's down, or hold the mouse over a fallen enemy to finish them off. Mm-hmm. But 2/3 of the time, it didn't finish them off.
Yeah, like it would miss. It seemed almost like the hitbox was just not really in a good place.
But it would register a hit on the zombies. They would make a noise as if you hit them, but it wouldn't actually kill them in the game. You know, you can't say, hey, do this to kill enemies if it's not going to kill them, because that was extremely frustrating for me to do that, move on to the next zombie, and then have that one I just
get back up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was kind of frustrating. Which brings me to the next point. The game as a whole is pretty glitchy. Unfortunately, more than half of my cutscenes had no audio whatsoever. Did you have that experience?
Really? No, I never had that. I never had that problem.
Oh, that's actually pretty weird, because I wanted to check and see if it was just me. And on the forums, it seemed like a large number of people had that same experience. However, there was like a somewhat recent announcement by the developer within the last few months stating that they released a patch that fixed that problem. So it could just be that maybe for some reason my game didn't update to the latest version. I'm not really sure, but it was kind of frustrating. Some of the cutscenes that had quite a bit of action in them just had no sound whatsoever, no music, no voices.
Yeah, I never had that problem. All of my cutscenes ran flawlessly, but I did notice a significant number of glitches in the game itself where things would just be broken, or,
Yeah.
For example, one was, you had mentioned, hey, did you find this secret here? And then you showed it to me, and I was like, yeah, I found it, and I hit the target with the slingshot 8 times, and it didn't do anything, so I just moved on,
Right. Yeah, and similarly to that, I did have some problems where the world, because there are some areas where like a wall will break, allowing you to move on to the next point in the game or whatever, and sometimes that just wouldn't happen. But I wouldn't know that because I hadn't played the game before then. So I would be like, where's the next place for me to go? And I couldn't tell where it was. Or like a platform, that was supposed to be elevated was just gone, had just disappeared, that kind of thing. And I literally would have to quit the game and load it again to actually get those things to work properly, which was a little frustrating. Something else that happened a lot, and I think you may have also experienced this, was pausing the game would oftentimes cause it to freeze up for 15 to 30 seconds.
Yeah, every single time. Literally every time I'd pause the game, it was at least a 15-second pause. So.
Yeah, and that's a pretty big problem, and I know it's pretty common just from my research. So that was a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah, and oftentimes when I'm playing a game on my PC, I have it up on one screen and Gmail up on my other, and I'm chatting with people, so I can just pause the game and switch, and it made it pretty much near impossible to do that, or just really cumbersome, which, it's a small thing, but it could be avoided.
Yeah, it's weird to me to just not be able to pause the game without 15 to 30 seconds of the game being frozen. Like, I don't know. It could be a problem with the port. I know it was originally on Xbox Live Arcade before it was brought over to PC, so who knows, but that's worth mentioning. The last thing I want to mention is the voice acting is atrocious.
It really is pretty bad, and I think you mentioned this to me before, but it gets worse as the game goes.
Yeah, at first I chalked it up to the fact that the game is sort of laid out like a cheesy B-movie, but by the end of the game, it was so grating. I couldn't take it, and my girlfriend, Glossoli on SharcTank, she was sitting behind me, actually, while I was finishing up the game, and she was listening to some of that voice acting, and she herself was just cringing behind me.
Yeah, your main character who you heard the most was, like we said, just a cheesy version of Batman.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he was probably the best voice in the
Exactly.
game.
I was going to say that exactly. He was bad, and he was the best. So all of them, every other voice just lacked everything that makes a good, a voice actor good.
Yeah, and on the flip side, on the subject of audio, and I think this is something you might not have noticed as much as I did, similarly to how I didn't really notice the graphics as much as you did, but one of the few aspects of the game that I really truly enjoyed was the music. I really liked the game's recurring melody, which you can kind of hear on the ambient track that plays in the title screen of the game. It's a recurring melody, so basically you kind of hear that same melody in some of the game's various tracks that play throughout the game, and it ranged from sort of ambient and unsettling to like fast-paced and action-packed. But I found that it kept the music consistent and enjoyable. I feel like the score itself really fit the theme of the game.
Yeah, for me, I didn't really notice the music that much. I don't know if I was just too focused on maybe admiring the graphics or what it was, but the music just didn't stand out to me.
Yeah, I mean, I played the entire game with my headphones on. That might have helped. But I also tend to notice music in games pretty often, so I don't know.
So, one thing that I wanted to mention was combat in the game. We already talked about the fire axe and how subpar the combat was with that.
Oh, I guess we didn't mention the guns, huh?
Yeah, the thing that drove me insane is you get the shotgun, and that is, that's the stereotypical zombie killer right there. Waves of zombies get mowed down by shotguns. But the shotgun could only hit one target at a time, and maybe that was a glitch in my game. Did you experience that as well?
I was able to hit multiple zombies at once with the shotgun, but the problem is just like with every other weapon, you have to hit them in the head to kill them, even with the shotgun. So basically, if I aimed at the first zombie in a line of zombies, if I aimed at their head, the rest of the spread of the shotgun would hit the other zombies, but not their heads. Basically, the first zombie's head would explode, and all the other zombies would get kind of pegged with the shotgun, but keep coming after me, and it was very frustrating. And it was kind of mentioned before that you couldn't really take down more than one zombie at a time, with the fire axe. It was kind of the same way with guns. If you just happen to have enough ammunition to really try and just take out everything that's in front of you because you don't feel like trying to jump over it or what have you, the game would just continuously spawn zombies or bring zombies in from the background and foreground as long as it needed to either kill you or tell you that you just have to run away. And that was a little frustrating.
Yeah, the weird thing for me is even with the shotgun, even if I hit one that's directly in front of me with the head and there's 3 stacked on top of it, the other 3 would show no... Even if it wasn't a headshot, the other zombies would show no indication of being hit at all. Like, it was super frustrating. And like you said, even if I did manage to kill several zombies in a short period of time, more would just come. And that's kind of something that really bugged me about this game, was like, there are situations where until you hadn't come upon it before, you were just going to die, and then you'd have to reload and do it again, which I think is fairly common for, like you said, like roguelikes or even some platformers, but I think that to me is bad level design, But anyway, I think we're getting to the time where we should come to our conclusions. This is getting a little long for a something that's not supposed to be too in-depth. We got a little in-depth, but that's okay. Overall, what were your experiences like with the game?
Well, I guess if I had to summarize everything that I had previously said about it, at first it looked really cool. I mean, I was excited for a survival horror platformer, which is fairly unique, as we mentioned. That takes place in the city of Seattle. But, basically as I got further and further in the game, I was more disappointed by the glitches, the crappy story, etc. and so forth. So, what about you?
Well, yeah, I kind of had a similar situation where coming into it, I thought the graphics were great and I thought the concept was cool, but it's just like there was so much frustration from the controls not being too great, from glitches, from a dumb story with bad voice acting to boot. It just like all of the niceness got lost. It was just It was forgotten. It became the backseat to the stuff that really caught my attention, which was the frustration.
Yeah.
So overall, the game for me was frustrating. I wouldn't have finished it if not for doing this review.
Yeah, fortunately, it was a decent length. It was like 4 to 5 hours, maybe 6 hours.
Maybe 6.
But a lot of what was piled in there wasn't all that enjoyable. So I mean, take with that what you will.
Yeah, it felt really repetitive. It was like hey, it's this huge puzzle that I need to jump through, and then
climb on some shit.
Exactly.
Now hit a zombie.
Yeah, exactly.
Run away.
Yeah,
climb on some more shit.
Yeah, that's the game in a nutshell. And there's no compelling story or just nothing to redeem the game, I think. So overall, I'm going to say not worth it.
Yeah, I would have to say the same. For the $14.99, the asking price, the retail price, I don't think that's worth it. I think it's for the sale price that we got, the $350. That's fine. Even if I had only played it for an hour and decided, I didn't really like that, it still would have been okay for the $350. But
yeah, and I mean, I should mention that I've seen a lot of positive reviews. I mean, quite a few mixed reviews, but I have seen a lot of positives. So this game may be the game for you. If they have a demo out someday, maybe give that a try. And like Dane said, if you can find it for another sale and it's $350, you might as well pick it up and give it a try. It might be for you. That's
fair to say. Well, that's that. We have decided on a game for our next episode.
Yeah.
It's called Cook, Serve, Delicious.
You can't see what I just did, but I made like this... Anyway.
You did the thing, the Italian chef thing, though.
The thing. Molto grazie. I don't even know what that means.
I was going to say, though, I picked that game because it looks kind of like a really in-depth version of one of those cheesy Facebook, like, Caféville games. So I'd really like to see, actually, if it delivers more than a crappy Android make-some-burgers game.
Yeah, man, I'm excited because I personally am a fan of Bistro Boulevard and Diner Town Tycoon and games like that. So I'm really excited.
Was that sarcasm?
No, I'm serious.
Oh, okay, cool.
I like those games. Like I say, it's a guilty pleasure, I guess.
All right, see you guys next time.